This is Alan from Athens, Georgia, dealing with session 3 based on my book Broken Crayons. First chapter had dealt with the fact that there are traits that human beings possess and or they can develop to increase their ability to think creatively, differently, uniquely, unusually, originally. In the second session, the idea was that we can develop those, use those, and create other skills in ourselves. Today the focus is on chapter 3, or the third issue, is the development of leaders. I saw parallels between everything I was reading and studying about leadership in 100 to 200 different books that were popular in the 80s and 90s, that the most creative leaders tended to be the most productive and effective in the long run. So I saw parallels to my concept of people who break crayons or crayon breakers, leaders. Think of a few leaders that you have the greatest respect for at this time, or perhaps those you've read about in history. Think of some of the names. I'll give you a few that I often think about. Walt Disney, of course, of what he did from his small studio in Chicago, then Kansas City, then eventually in Los Angeles and Anaheim, and the world that he created with the aid of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of other highly creative people. When it comes to the military, one of the leaders that stood out the most for me in the 90s was Arnold Schwarzkopf. I'd never heard a general who was concerned about deaths of his enemy. Mother Teresa, of course, was highly creative in her own ways related to religion and the social services she provided. Lee Iacocca goes from Ford Motor Company, goes to Chrysler, and turns it around with the aid of many other people using very creative approaches. Jack Welch takes over General Electric and makes him a giant. Steve Jobs, of course, along with Steve Wozniak, started Apple, but then Apple was changed and Steve was fired. He was brought back a few years later and totally changed the company once again. Michael Dell started with a few $1,000s, putting together specially made computers in his dorm room, and eventually becomes Dell Computer. And then Ted Turner, who did many things in the past, creation of the 24-hour cable network idea, news 24 hours a day, and so forth. If we take a look at the 32 traits that mentioned in chapter 1 and 2 in the first two sessions, and we take a look at some of these leaders, we look for their strengths. One of the key things that came out of many studies of leaders in the past, Henry Ford being one, was Henry Ford learned that he needed to surround himself with people smarter than him. There are stories that Bill Gates and many others have done the same thing, that the strongest leaders are the ones who realize where their weaknesses are or their losses are, and they surround themselves who are strong in those areas. So let's think about it. If you're a leader and your goal is to break crayons or to see if the crayons that you have currently are functioning, what might be some of those? A few of those that we might consider within a company are policies, rules, regulations, or procedures, and systems that you have. Are they truly working? Do they need to be adjusted? One of the strongest books I read in the 80s was a book called If It Ain't Broke, Break It. And his whole premise was the American way of solving problems versus the Japanese, very generally, was that the fact that the Japanese tended to perfect and perfect and perfect. Americans had a tendency to do best when things got broken. In fact, more often than not, they were more successful when they deliberately broke things and then had to fix them or replace them with new things. So we can look at any aspect of a business, a company, a corporation, a department, or a team, and say, wait, this is how it is now. What if we had to break it? What if we had to change it? How would we do that? And the things that I'm stressing with the idea of creative thinking being used more often and more thoroughly within teams, departments, entire plants or stores or office complexes or entire corporations is that we need to start looking for possibilities, not always absolutely correct solutions. We need to look for alternatives. Look for basic reasons why we do what we do, and then look for new perspectives. Examine a word that became very popular in the mid-'80s by a man named Joel Barker, paradigms. Basically, it's a scientific term that represents habits that you have that are so instilled in you, you're not even aware that you do them. And he brought up issues about how entire industries were destroyed when their paradigms were changed. And one of the ones he liked to tell was about the Swiss watch industry, which had been analog, had been mechanical for hundreds of years. But then along came a clock designer who came up with a digital watch idea, or digital clock. The Swiss companies didn't accept it. They didn't see it as clock. But Texas Instruments and Seiko from Japan, Texas from US, Seiko from Japan, both bought the rights to this young man's design. Well, the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey, a news announcer many years ago, used to say, the rest of the story in that one is the inventor of the actual digital watch was a Swiss watchmaker. Like there are stories now about the fact that the inventor of the original digital camera actually worked for Kodak. These are all stories that float around. What I'm stressing just in this short session today is think about the way you lead. Are you leading from a creative position? Are you using a lot of creative ideas and traits? Are you encouraging your people to be more creative in their jobs? When you ask for one idea, stop doing that. Ask for 6. Ask for a variety. Ask for the wild ones versus the very tame and simple ones. And then take time to experiment, to test them out. As in the book by Kriegel, If It Ain't Broke, Break It Anyway, one of the key companies over the last now 60 plus years, McDonald's Corporation, are constantly testing. In other words, testing is another word for breaking. Finding out whether it still works or whether there's a better way to do it. Are you doing that in your daily job? Are you taking a few minutes each day and going, what among the things that I'm doing now could I do better? What if I couldn't do things a certain way? What if something stopped? What would I do in place of that? And then explore a variety of ideas. Think from different directions, different perspectives. In tomorrow's session, we're going to start with techniques and tools of how to spark ideas when perhaps your mind is not that creative at the moment. That's one of the things I learned many years ago when I became aware of the fact that there were things called the creative problem-solving process, of which there are hundreds. There are a few that stand out. over time because they've gotten the greatest use or the greatest publicity. But then there are hundreds to thousands of tools and techniques, from brainstorming to Scamper, which is one that's commonly used around the world, that can help us be creative on demand. Or as Alex Osborne said in his classic book by the same title, applied imagination. Good luck. We'll see you and talk with you tomorrow.